As we've heard, African tech is the next big thing. In just the last 6 years, the continent became home to 7 unicorns, companies worth over $1 billion, which are in fintech. To expand on this and the potential of tech in Africa, I'm joined by Ashish Thakkar. He's the co-founder and group CEO of the Mara Group. Andrew Torre, who's the regional president for Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, and Fatou Diaw, who's the president of ORFA, which is an African businesswoman organization. She will be speaking to us in French, so if you'd like to follow the translations, you can. There is translations on your headphones there. Perhaps, Ashish, I'll start with you. You've been in the sector for a while. Just give us your insight into the evolution of tech in Africa, the African ecosystem, what works and what doesn't.
Thank you so much, Nzinga. It's an absolute pleasure being here. It's great being back at FII. So I think the continent has truly evolved, and tech overall, as Africa has given birth to quite a few unicorns already, and is in the process of giving birth to quite a few more. I think the best part has been that there's a real demand for a lot of our services. When you think about fintech as an example, the latest report from McKinsey shows that there's going to be 8x growth by 2025 in terms of fintech revenue. 80% of our continent still remains unbanked, and 80% remains meaningfully unconnected, meaning 4G handsets with 4G connectivity. So when you think about that, with a population of 1.3 billion people, we've truly got something that's really addressable. It's not just a hype. It's not just a valuation game. This is something that has a true requirement that we're seeing grow. So it's a really exciting time for our continent, and I think it's a great time to be active on it.
Fatou, if I can ask you what the potential of tech is to change women's lives in Africa and the work that you do with the African Businesswoman Organization.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Permettez-moi de saluer Sa Majesté le Roi Salman, le serviteur des mosquées. De saluer également Sa Majesté le Prince Mohammed bin Salman, que je félicite pour son leadership. C'est un visionnaire. Donc, la question, vous m'avez posé la question de savoir, répétez-moi la question, s'il vous plaît.
مش سامع هو جاي
S'il vous plaît.
مش سامع والله امسك ايه
So I'm just asking, what's the potential
كلم انجليزي
technology to change women's lives in Africa, and talk to us about the work that you're doing with the African Businesswoman Organization.
Ce qu'il faut, c'est d'abord investir dans les enfants, investir dans la jeunesse et les femmes. En investissant dans la jeunesse et les femmes, il faut les former. Nous avons besoin de former les femmes, nous avons besoin d'avoir un capital humain. Nous avons besoin pour les enfants, pour les jeunes, d'une éducation de qualité. Un capital humain qualifié. Et vous voyez, nous les femmes, nous aimons beaucoup les diamants, mais nous sommes sur terre et le diamant est dans la terre, sous terre. Donc il faut des ressources humaines de qualité. Il faut les former pour qu'ils aillent extraire les diamants, par exemple, le travailler et mettre ça à la disposition des populations. Nous avons les États aussi, je leur demande de construire la compensation industrielle. Par exemple, dans un État, vous faites un appel d'offres pour des investisseurs.
And you are providing, and as such you will have different presentations, and you need to select among these presentations, you need to select the best. So in these proposals and these opportunities, you need to force investors to adopt freshly graduates and to enable them, to train them in order to be able to work hand in hand with you. So at the same time, whether this to be in railways or to be at the level of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example, You can ask training in aviation or also in
de les amener à leur
or to have training for the freshly graduate students and to involve them in labs, in factories, in order to involve in the manufacture of airplanes. So we need a huge human capital with high efficiency as well as to be well trained and experienced. And this is what will ensure that we will be able to manufacture at different levels and fields in Africa. Let me tell you that Africa urgently needs human capacities in this field. So the child needs to understand the idea of manufacture 4.0. And this issue can be applicable either in smart agriculture or smart farming that is using digitalization. Also, at different levels, we are using digitalization. So in Africa, in fact, we have to spend on youth. We have to invest in youth and on the children. So what I'm doing now in the company is that I'm investing in the kids on the streets. In Senegal, we have children who are living in streets, and they are Muslim kids. And what we want to achieve for those kids is to create homes for them, to create shelters, and to train them, to educate them in industries, for example, or career or professional or career training, in order to work, in order to be saved from streets and to be richer more than the rich people themselves. So I need to confirm on the necessity of investing in these categories of people, to invest in women in particular, to invest in childhood. In Senegal, for example,
The conversation and keep it flowing. We've spoken about with the other panels. Andrew, Visa has a lot of partnerships on the African continent. Tell us about those and why specifically Africa?
Yes, so thank you. Our business is based on partnerships, across the board. We've been in Africa now for 50 years. We continue to open offices. And if you go back to something Ashish talked about, there are still so many folks there that are underserved, that are not connected and don't have access. So we realize that we have to open new partnerships in order to be able to reach those consumers and those small micro sellers that are underserved. And that goes back to new partnerships and new technology to be able to reach them. And it's an incredibly important point because many of the reasons why folks haven't entered the formal system is because the distribution system hasn't worked for folks. Traditional bank-led distribution hasn't worked. You've seen a lot of the M&Os come in and offer mobile money. So we've got a whole generation now of fintechs that are coming out and that are digital first. They're onboarding consumers quickly. And there's a real need. Payments is a very early hook to bring people into the financial system. Payments have become critical. So we see that as a massive opportunity. We have partnerships across. On the consumer side, we are partnering with MNOs. We announced a partnership with M-Pesa, Vodacom last year. We launched this year with a Visa credential in M-Pesa's wallet. So it gives access to all of their consumers in Kenya to be able to purchase anywhere on the 70 million merchants that we have across the globe. At the same time, we're also working with a whole new generation of startups and fintechs that support small and micro sellers. Folks like Paga in Nigeria, Kafia in Ethiopia, and others that are able to scale quickly and use technology that we've got called Tap to Phone to be able to literally take a $15 handset and turn it into an acceptance device that works around small sellers across the community. So partnership is certainly core to our business, and we bring new technology to be able to support these partners.
Ashish, a point that Fatou talked about now was the fact that there's a lack of access to capital, and Andrew also spoke about how, especially operating on the African continent, you need very different dynamic solutions, perhaps more so than anywhere else in the world.
That's right, Nzinga. It's a good point. I mean, when you're building a fintech or a to-be tech unicorn, in the rest of the world, when you're losing money for the first few years, it's fine, it's expected. You know, it's customer acquisition, it's your growth stage, so it's fine that you're burning cash for the first few years, and then you finally do break even. Whereas, in my opinion, I think in Africa, when we're building these companies, it's really important to look at it through a different lens. If we're going to be truly dependent on raising external capital constantly in order to survive and in order to grow, I don't think that's going to be as sustainable, because our continent is looked at differently to the rest of the world. And therefore, in my opinion, we need to create businesses that actually do have a self-sustainability element in there from a very early stage. So, for example, we're building a digital bank fintech right now in Africa, which we've launched, and you know, by the second year we will be profitable. Now that's really important, because if you're not, and if you're constantly just kind of spending the first 4 years burning cash and losing money, and then constantly trying to raise money, when the markets do turn, as we're kind of seeing right now with how the public equities are reacting, and as a result that has a direct impact on the private equities markets, when that capital flow does slow down, unfortunately, as one of the true emerging markets, as a continent, we are kind of put on the back burner, right? And therefore, it's really important that our business models do create that self-sustainability and scalability within itself, baked in. And I think that's happening more and more, but I think for really, really long-term, scalable, sustainable businesses, we really need to factor that in.
I just want to stay on that point, Andrew. There's an innovation center that Visas works on the African continent. What kind of work comes out of there? And what's the thinking about how that's going to also lead into the future of fintech or payment systems on the African continent?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we opened an innovation studio in Nairobi earlier this year, and it's the first one we've had on the continent. And we did it for a number of reasons. One, not only are partnerships local, but solutions need to be local and for the market. So our innovation studio has access to our entire development platform. So people can innovate through our APIs. And what we do is we bring fintechs in for co-creation sessions, whether they're in Nairobi, Nigeria, or Botswana, to come in and work with us. The other thing, we've coupled that with something we do, and Ms. Diaw was talking about that, is around supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs. So we have our global innovation platform called the Visa Everywhere Initiative, and we run that every year. We've run it across sub-Saharan Africa, and we invite startups to come in, solve problems, compete, and with that, they get expertise. They get access to our expertise, some of our partners' expertise. They're able to use our platforms, and we give financial prizes to them, and they can go on further and compete globally. The benefit of that, though, is their exposure in the market. They often find partners, and that cohort so far that we've brought through, the 10,000 startups, and this is across the globe since we initiated it, have raised over $5 billion worth of capital. So we think it's very, very important to be able to support the next generation of startups, and we feel like we're able to do that certainly through our innovation centers and programs like our Visa Everywhere initiative.
Ashish, we speak about resources in Africa that we have, we speak about our minerals, we speak about our energy, but often what we don't speak about is
C'est ce que nous avons de
and how that really is one of our most powerful things. African youth are innovative, they are eager to work, and they're eager for opportunities. So what would you say to an investor who's considering coming onto the African continent about specifically that, and also other opportunities when it comes to tech in Africa?
It's a great point. And I think, just to build on what Andrew is saying, I think what Visa has done by creating these labs is truly phenomenal. And Mrs. Fatou was mentioning as well about the skill set that is there and exists. What I'm seeing more and more is, I've been active on the continent for 26 years. At the early stages, you'd need to think about bringing in expatriates, and then a lot of knowledge transfer would need to happen, etc. Whereas today, the kind of local talent we're able to find who are truly energetic, who are really eager to get going, who have the skill sets, is truly phenomenal. So my message would be, when looking at investing in Africa, I think, firstly, please don't generalize us. I think it's really important to kind of narrow it down. We have some amazing gems, and most of our continent are gems, and there are some that are going through challenges as countries, but the reality is that every single market is very unique, and every single, we're such a young population. We're such a young population who is extremely dynamic, who's very long-term mindset, long-term approach, etc. So I think it's genuinely the best time to be looking at investing in Africa and really taking advantage of the fact that we've got a lot of human capital, to your point, who's very eager to take the continent to the next level. And which is why I always joke that Africa isn't playing to catch up. We're playing to lead the way. And I genuinely do believe that. With the size of our continent, physically, geographically, with the kind of population growth that we've got, with the young demographic we've got, with amazing women entrepreneurs that we've got on the continent, and phenomenal leadership that you're seeing more and more in different countries pop up, I think it's the perfect time.
Andrew, I just want to stay on that point. Visa opened their first office in Africa around 30 years ago in Cape Town, so you really do understand the power of the continent. But it's also not a monolith. Cape Town is very different to Lagos. What advice would you give for people and corporations especially who are considering going into the continent about how to navigate the different parts of who we are?
Exactly. It's a great question. You've almost helped me answer it, right? So we have been on the continent for a long time. We now have 11 offices on the continent, and every country is different. We recently opened our latest office in DRC in April of this year. And the recipe for us has been a long-term commitment to the continent. So we hire locally, we bring in local talent, we develop local talent, and over the years that's become increasingly more technical because that's what it takes to kind of wire the infrastructure. To Ashish's point, Africa's going to leapfrog existing technologies. It's going to scale through digital and mobile. So we recognize that. I think the other thing we do when we come in is we often do public-private partnerships with governments. Governments across the board understand deeply how financial inclusion and access are inextricably linked, and they certainly want to be able to drive that access inclusion. The economic benefits are really there, so government is a really good partner. So those are some of our thoughts. Stay local, hire locally, and work with local partners in the government.
Mama Fatou, if you can talk to us about how women and how you've seen in your work, when you empower women, the potential that has to grow economies and change people's lives around that community.
Et donc, je disais que tout passe par la formation. Chez nous, ce que le chef d'État a fait, c'est de créer une agence qui s'appelle les 3 FPT, une formation destinée aux femmes et aux jeunes. Et ces jeunes-là ont un défi d'accès au financement. Et le président de la République a créé une agence qui s'appelle Financement rapide de
This an institution for which fund programs directed to children and women, so women can reach, they can receive funds from banks. We have the payments that enhanced by payment agency, and we have other methods of funding directed especially for the children and women, and we have a fund which is directed and designed for women only, which is a fund made with the partnership between the private and the public sectors, so women can get funds without any guarantee or warranty, and they are exempted to provide any guarantee or warranty for getting such fund, because the crisis of Ukraine has taught us that Africa should depend on its human capital and huge potential. It should further develop manufacturing, industry, farming. So this is what we have learned from this crisis, that to increase the production, the local production, the African production, we shouldn't export raw materials, and we should allow women to untap the huge potentials in Africa. We can foster and build partnerships to be able to export our products and with the labeling them. And this is by this way, women play a pivotal role in invention. When we talk about using plastic bags in my countries to some Asian countries, I have seen something that drew my attention, and I will make as such in my country. It's not made of plastic, but from agriculture products such as corn. So we can manufacture plastic from such material, this bag from such a material, so we can conserve the environment, just to avoid using plastic, and the plastic is not used in my country. So we can export as such friendly, environmental friendly products.
But Ashish, a point that's been raised now is the need for women to be empowered and solutions that are taking place. But we're also talking about big fintech companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. In an African context, you can't afford to just focus on unicorns, on creating unicorns, when the majority of people are still dealing with day-to-day and bread-and-butter issues. Is there an imperative for people who own these unicorns and who are very successful in business, like yourself or otherwise, to make sure that this gap is closed? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't take away from your primary objective?
Look, I mean, I'm a big believer. I mean, I chair the United Nations Foundation's Global Entrepreneurship Council. The SDGs is something that it's very close to me, as it is to many people. I'm a big believer that if your business does not have an element of creating a positive social impact, it's not sustainable, right? I think social enterprises, the definition of it is great, but I think every single business has to have a social purpose, right? An amazingly large organization like Andrew's Visa is already creating that impact through different initiatives that they're creating. Every single business must do that, and we have a huge responsibility to do so. And I think, for example, in ours, we have something called the Mara Foundation, which is focused on enabling, empowering, and inspiring young entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs. It's a low-touch model, and we've impacted around 900,000 entrepreneurs across the continent so far in a very low-touch way. But there's so many other initiatives when we were doing that, and we were going deeper into the countries. There's so many phenomenal initiatives that you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel and create your own. It's also backing others who are actually doing it really well. So there's a lot going on, and I think, an organization like the one Marlene runs, which is FEDA, has that direct impact in terms of they're focused on helping businesses export, and with that lens and with a scalable lens. They've started with almost close to $1 billion, which is great. You see African capital backing African causes. So I think from grassroots to the larger scale, there's a lot more going on, but exactly to your point, Nzinga, there has to be so much more. And I think it's a collective responsibility. It's not only our public sector that has to drive that, it's a massive thing that the private sector has to take on.
Andrew, what policy measures are going to continue growing the tech sector on the continent?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If I can just touch on one thing Ashish said, which I completely agree, it's not an either or. You have to have impact. Our organization, you're right, our 25,000 employees come to work every day, and they want to have an impact. It's what gets them out of bed and what gets them serving their clients. On the policy side, there are a variety of things. I think if you've looked at where the predominance of capital has gone into technology and fintechs, it's across a smaller number of markets now. I think in the third quarter of 2021, there was almost $1 billion. 60% of that was put into fintech. And I think when you look at the big fintech companies, they tend to go to the large population. So they're in Nigeria, they're in South Africa, they're in Kenya, and a few markets out there. And the reality is that fintechs want to be able to start in a market, they want to be able to grow, improve their value proposition over time, and then move to other markets. And I think one of the challenges is there's so much regulatory fragmentation across the African continent. We talk about it, and I'll just say it is very, very difficult to be a central bank governor. They've got monetary stability, they've got financial stability, but they also know they need to be able to keep pace with innovation. So I think Saudi Arabia is a really good example. They have a regulatory sandbox here, which opens and welcomes innovation. So that's one of the things we talk to central bank governors about, which is allow innovation to happen in a way where you can test it and then allow it to scale. So I think one of the things is certainly more innovation through a sandbox. I think the second thing is it's still sometimes too hard to get licenses. I think e-money licenses allow new players to come in and quickly grow and evolve and support consumers and sellers. And you need more of these policies across more markets to allow fintechs to grow and expand across the continent.
Let's pick up on that point, and a point that Andrew made earlier on as well about working with governments. What's the importance of private and public sector collaboration, especially in an African context, Ashish?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial, and Andrew articulated it really well, which is, having the ability to actually test certain new technologies in line with government. Look, I sympathize with our governments as well, because naturally they've got a lot of responsibility to ensure that it's not misused, and they're, not everyone's got a perfect agenda. But at the same time, what we've realized is having the right level of dialogue and making sure that, firstly, obviously, in our case, it's slightly different because we've been around for quite a while. So naturally, there's we've built that relationships and the trust around that in terms of execution, what we're trying to do. But at the same time, articulating what your vision is, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, and keeping them constantly up to date. We have a regulatory responsibility to give, a quarterly report and then a half-yearly report. My team is giving a fortnightly report to the central bank because we want them to be fully up to speed. Now, the more we do that, the more cooperative and assisting they're going to be to us when we need to do something slightly different. And I think one thing is for sure, every government wants to create a massive, financial inclusion, digital inclusion. Everyone has this agenda of ensuring no one is left behind by 2030 in line with the SDGs. That's clear. But the method of getting there, naturally, there's got to be a lot of tweaking. I think one thing that also should be done is also communication within the governments and the countries, right? So something has worked in one market, and when you want to go to that next market, you're pretty much starting from scratch, right? Again, unless you don't have other businesses there and relationships, etc. But otherwise, you're starting from ground zero. And I think that could be done in a slightly better way because as a continent, we're so much more plugged in with each other, but on the regulatory side, it's still very independent.
I want to stay with you, Ashish. We've spoken quite glowingly about the potential of Africa, all the good things we have. We have not spoken about the challenges when it comes to, in particular, fintech companies and the challenges that those African countries and companies have. What's actually not working?
To be honest, I think it's exactly like Andrew said. It's the ability, and I think somebody else said it on a panel earlier. I think it was Saleh of SoftBank, but basically the ability to become multi-country in the true sense. Being an African player sounds phenomenal, sounds amazing, but we are 54 countries, right? So how do you really scale to 5, 6, 7, 8 countries in a practical way? It is starting from zero in each case, right? I mean, that's the reality. I mean, I think it's great because the entry levels barrier is higher and it's easier for players like us. But the reality is when you think about it on a holistic level, when you're really trying to create that scalable impact, when you're really trying to approach that 1.3 billion people, that's, I think, the challenge that you've got to be practical about. The macros are phenomenal, make a lot of sense, but don't get carried away. We are a continent, we're not a country.
Okay. Mama Fatou, I'm going to ask you and each of our panelists in 1 minute or less to leave our audience with your final thoughts and words. All right, my apologies about this. We're going to ask Mama Fatou to wait. Ashish and Andrew, if you can give us your final wrap-ups in about a minute and a half, and the final thoughts for the panel as we look at the African tech ecosystem, the space, what's working, and also if I can also ask you to throw forward really with a focus on the future and what the future of the African continent and tech space looks like. Andrew, I'll start with you. Ashish, you can finish.
Okay, thank you. I will say there have been tremendous gains made, but the last X percent, I think there's about 29% of folks that are still excluded. It's going to be harder. It's going to be harder because they've been more resistant to be able to come into the formal financial system. So it's going to be, there's not one thing, there are many things we need to do, across the ecosystem. Ashish mentioned it earlier. We need better and cheaper access to broadband. We need to make sure that we're creating the right solutions, especially for female entrepreneurs. 26% of women in Africa are female entrepreneurs. There is a great benefit to bringing them into the financial system because they invest 90% of their income in their family's welfare, education, and well-being. There needs to be real work done there. It's hard, but it has to happen. And then, the other thing I'll say is, we still want to make sure we see much more access to bring in small businesses and consumers. And part of that starts with there's not enough digital identity. There are not enough national identity systems. So we need to think about a solution that allows one to scale through a handset, and that means to be able to identify themselves through a handset and be able to open an account. There's real work that needs to be done there. There are folks like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others working on that. But I think those are certainly recipes that will see us bring far more people into the ecosystem, which are critical.
Into financial inclusion, Ashish?
I'm extremely excited about the years ahead. I think when you visualize our markets, I mean, just Tanzania as an example, one segment like motorbike taxis, we have 1.8 million of them. Women entrepreneurs who are, street vendors for food, right? Food street vendors. There's over 2.2 million of them. When you think about all these different associations and communities, all of them need and want 4G smartphones. All of them need bank accounts. All of them need insurance offerings. All of them need access to short-term loans. All of them want better digital education access for their kids. And through our offering, within 15 minutes, we're able to onboard them with, to Andrew's point, a lot of our countries don't have it, but East Africa particularly does, where we're able to verify their KYC, we're able to open up a bank account, we're able to issue a loan for a device straight away, we're able to give 6,000 free ebooks, everything instantly within 15 minutes. And when you visualize that and think about scaling that across our continent and in different communities, different associations, I think it's going to be truly phenomenal of what these individuals and those families can do with these devices and that access to finance and better insurance coverage and so much more. So I think we're literally skimming the surface. There's so much to do. There's a huge breadth to cover, but there's a lot of depth to go into as well. So very excited.
Thank you all so much for your insight this afternoon. As we've heard, Africa is the future, especially when it comes to the financial space and the potential that we have in our women, our youth, and our tech. On our panel today, Ashish Thakkar, the co-founder and group CEO of Mara Group, Fatou Diaw, the president of ORFA, an African businesswoman organization, and Andrew Torre, the regional president of Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. My name is Nzinga Qunta. It's been such a pleasure facilitating this discussion and hearing all of your insights. Thank you so much. A round of applause, please, for our panelists as we leave. Thank you.